Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of challenging sources, boil them down to their essence, and give you the intellectual shortcut you need to be seriously well-informed. Today, we're taking perhaps the deepest dive of all, right into the core of human experience. We're looking at the philosophy of sustained inner peace, using the really radical insights from Frank Kinslow's work Beyond Happiness. I want to kick this off with that famous, that often misattributed definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and just expecting a different result.
Right.
If we take that idea and we sort of zoom out and apply it not just to a person, but to all of humanity, a really strange pattern starts to emerge. Think about it. All our collective effort, every time we solve some massive life-threatening problem, we cure a disease, we invent tech that ends a famine somewhere, we stop a local war, it just feels like bigger, scarier problems rise up to take its place.
Existential ones.
Exactly. We're talking world wars, climate destabilization, new global plagues, superbugs from overusing antibiotics. It's like we solve for X and suddenly we're left dealing with X squared.
And Kinslow argues this isn't some coincidence. It's not just, oh, the world is complex. He says it's a symptom.
Yeah.
He asserts that our brand of insanity actually gets worse with every problem we solve.
Worse? How?
Because, he says, the root of all our suffering isn't our external circumstances. It's one single, unattended part of our lives.
Our relationship with our own minds.
Precisely. Our relationship with our minds. We are constantly trying to fix the world by adding more knowledge, more solutions, more effort. He calls it using addition in a subtraction world. The technique might be brilliant, but the formula is just fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
And so the suffering continues.
That is a huge claim. But the sources we've looked at, they immediately ground this in real-world usefulness. This isn't just, abstract theory.
Not at all.
The effectiveness of his system, what he calls self-inquiry, it's resonated across the globe because it offers the simple truth that just bypasses all that struggle. And when you look at the testimonials we've gathered, they're from wildly different people. A CPA buried in spreadsheets, a legal nurse consultant dealing with constant medical trauma.
A Spanish teacher? A forensic scientist?
Right, even a dentist. All of them are saying they found this sustained inner peace and this radical relief from stress through a system that is incredibly simple and, importantly, not religious. The promise seems to be universal, which suggests this is, it's more like a practical operating manual for being human.
And to really get the power of this subtraction idea, you have to understand the author's background. Because it's the ultimate dramatic reversal. Kinslow spent 35 years of his adult life in the quintessential search for enlightenment.
He was all in.
Totally. We're talking silent meditation, sequestered on mountaintops for long periods, hours every single day dedicated to spiritual austerities. All of it was to find and hold on to that elusive state of peace.
And he failed. He writes about it with this brutal honesty. He was just despondent, frustrated. He'd given his entire life to this one goal, and he came up completely empty. He got to this point of just absolute exhaustion, total surrender.
Right.
His awakening, when it finally came, wasn't in some grand moment of effort. It was the moment he gave up the entire cause.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is not your typical enlightenment story, on some beautiful sacred mountain peak. He talks about the moment he was sitting in a Borders Cafe in Flint, Michigan.
Not exactly the spiritual center of the universe.
Not at all. And he was just staring into a styrofoam cup of what he describes as truly tasteless, lukewarm green tea. And in that moment, he felt the last little ember of his hope, his desire to be peaceful, just wink out. He gave up. The struggle was over.
And in that complete stillness, that total negation of effort, he says the universe just stopped breathing. And then came what he calls the Big Bang, but instead of fire and stone, it was an explosion of stone, solid peace. He writes that the entire cafe, the lukewarm tea, the sticky table, everything just filled with this clear, vibrant light. He saw everything as pure energy, and somehow he realized he wasn't just observing it, he was it.
And that moment, staring into that cup of tea, that's the absolute hinge point for this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
Peace isn't found through effort. It's not found through monumental spiritual striving.
It's found by subtracting the effort, by surrender.
Exactly. The simple truth he found, and this is really our goal for today, is that peace is just a symptom of how we perceive the self. And when you adjust that perception, peace becomes unconditional. And it's that peace, not the fleeting conditional happiness we all chase, that leads to true, lasting contentment.
Okay, so let's get into the diagnosis. Kinslow is adamant that we have to correct this one fundamental error before anything else can change.
Right. And the core problem, the source of our suffering, it isn't the world, it's the mind. Or More accurately, it's how the mind works when we leave it unattended, when we're in what he calls a state of waking sleep.
I think we all know that feeling, that sense of being driven by thoughts you didn't consciously choose. He frames the mind not as the master, but as a tool that needs guidance.
A tool that needs guidance. If you leave it on autopilot, it just defaults to reflex and memory. He has a great name for it, auto-think.
Autothink. It's like leaving the car's engine running with no one in the driver's seat.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of HAL, the computer from 2001, a space odyssey. HAL was designed to run the ship, but when it was left to its own logical devices, it decided its programming was more important than the humans, and it led to chaos, destruction. Our mind is this incredible information processor, but if we trust it to run its own affairs, it defaults to what it knows. It tries to solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions.
Or worse, solutions that never even worked in the first place but are just familiar.
And that's where that addition and a subtraction world idea really clicks. You're trying to build a new life, a better relationship, whatever. But if you keep using the same mental programming, the same worry, the same judgment, the same effort, you're trying to solve a subtraction problem, which is removing suffering by using addition, piling on more stuff, more effort, more knowledge.
You're just adding gasoline to a fire you're trying to put out.
And the reason we do this is the ego. The ego is defined by fear and separation. And Kinslow says this is where the venom of the ego gets injected. His own life was the perfect case study. Every time he tried to add more knowledge or manipulate his environment, develop better relationships, even become more spiritual, it just made more problems.
Why?
Because every new idea, every new effort, every new thing he got was poisoned by the ego's need for control, for dominion.
So the ego just loves the struggle. It needs to gather and collect and achieve because its entire identity is based on what it possesses and controls.
Right. But the universe is infinite. So the ego's hunger can never, ever be satisfied by gathering a finite number of things. It's just a futile, desperate chase that leads to perpetual suffering or, at best, that temporary happiness that always fades.
So the big realization then is that real peace has to be unconditional. It can't be earned.
It cannot be earned. Kinslow's crystal clear on this. Money can't buy it. Hard work can't get it. Strong will, spiritual practices. None of it. If you rely on any technique or effort to find peace, you are creating a dependency.
So you're saying the very structure of effort is what's keeping peace away.
Precisely. Kinslow describes technique as a bridge. It's necessary, right? It gets you across the obstacle. But once you're on the other side, you have to leave the bridge behind. If you hold on to the technique, the struggle, the discipline, the belief that I worked so hard for this peace, you guarantee that permanent, effortless peace is impossible. That effort, that dependency is just more
Okay, so to subtract, we need to know what we're subtracting from. We need a clear reference point. And that brings us to this really profound distinction he makes between I and me.
This is the absolute core of self-inquiry. Me is the personality. It's your body, your job title, your thoughts, your emotions, your history. It's always changing. It's temporary. I, on the other hand, is the self. It's the unchanging, indestructible witness, the still center of peace. The self is the silent awareness that just watches the me.
I like the GPS analogy for this. It really helps ground the idea. The I is like the global positioning satellite. It's the fixed, unchanging point of reference. The GPS doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't drive the car, doesn't pick your destination.
But
Without it, the me, the driver, and the car has no reference point. It just gets swept away by the senses, the traffic, the emotion. We're always identifying with the car and the driver, and we totally forget about the silent, fixed satellite that's always there.
And Kinslow's main analogy for this is hunger. When you say I am hungry, you're acknowledging both parts. The equation is I am plus hungry. That's I plus me.
Right.
But we habitually devote 100% of our attention and energy to satisfying the hungry me. We eat, we acquire, we struggle for that temporary fix. But in doing that, we completely ignore the flavor of the I, which is pure, whole awareness. We satisfy the physical hunger, but we leave the table starving for wholeness.
And that explains why even when we get everything we thought we wanted, the money, the fame, the perfect relationship, there's still that vague, persistent longing. It's because we've only fed the me.
Exactly. And when you finally become aware of that unchanging, indestructible part of you, the I, that is always present, always peaceful, you lose all reason to worry. Inner peace just dawns spontaneously. Kinslow says unequivocally that your deepest desire, the one that all other desires spring from, is simply to know thyself. That awareness fulfills the deepest hunger, and all the superficial desires they either dissolve or they become effortless preferences.
All right, so that's the diagnosis. The problem isn't the problem, it's the mind. Now we move to the application. If the answer isn't doing more, then what is it?
This is where he posits this concept that's so challenging for the modern mind. Being is infinitely more effective than doing. If you want ultimate peace, you cannot do anything to get it. Mastery of life means stepping away from the struggle of doing and learning the simple act of being. Just being aware.
But that feels like a classic paradox. If I have to do something to learn how to be, aren't I still just relying on effort?
That's where the technique comes in. But remember, the technique is just the bridge. Kinslow gives us this little mental exercise, he calls it Experience 1, that proves the concept immediately and requires zero faith. It's just a test drive of pure awareness.
Okay, let's walk through it. What do you do?
It's very simple. You sit comfortably, you close your eyes, and first you just watch your thoughts. Let them flow. No judgment for just a few seconds. Just observe the stream. Then you ask yourself one very specific question. This is the entire technique. You ask, where will my next thought come from? And then you wait and you watch.
The genius of that question is that your mind can't answer it with a thought. The mind can only pull from the past. Asking where the next thought will come from is asking it to predict the future, which just, it stops the machinery cold.
Precisely. And the reward for this is what he calls the gap. A short, maybe fleeting break in thinking.
Yeah.
A space between asking the question and the next thought popping up.
Yeah.
You've experienced this all the time.
Yeah.
Like when you're trying to remember a word that's on the tip of your tongue.
Right. The harder you try, the further away it gets.
Exactly. The harder the me struggles, the deeper the word gets buried.
Yeah.
It's only when you stop trying, when you give up, that it surfaces. That's stopping. That's the gap.
And the analysis of this gap is what changes everything. The mind, the me, it hates this vacuum. Stillness is counterproductive. It's dangerous. It's a nuisance that has to be filled.
But here's the critical insight. The gap is the self. That short period of no thinking is pure, objective, unchanging awareness. And you can prove its wholeness immediately, Kinslow says, to test it. When you're in that gap, fully alone with yourself, between thoughts, are negative feelings possible? Can you feel anger, worry, sadness?
No, because they need a thought to hang on to. They need context, a memory.
Impossible. They can't exist. The pure I is the space where negativity simply cannot enter.
This completely redefines the mind's function. It's suggesting the mind isn't this brilliant creator we think it is.
It's a reflector, not a creator. The mind only reflects what is created in the silent whole compass. Self. Think about it practically. If someone asks your name, the answer is instant. It's reflected from deep memory. But if they ask, what did you eat for breakfast last Tuesday? There's a definite observable gap. The mind waits in that stillness for the answer to take form from the silence, and then it reflects it back as a thought.
So the mind, in its impatience, sees that waiting as wasted time. It's desperately trying to cover up the fact that true creation, true answers, true peace, they all come from stillness, not agitated activity.
So the goal is simply to observe the gap. You don't try to hold on to it. Kinslow recommends starting small. Practice Experience 1 for just 1 minute every hour. Or longer if you can. The effort isn't to get peace, but just to observe what's already there.
And this leads to what he calls momentum, which I find fascinating. It's the spontaneous return of peace without you even trying. It's like the universe takes over the job you were failing at.
Momentum is that state where the need for struggle and discipline just starts to wind down. It loses its hold on you. When you lose your inner peace during the day, it just automatically reestablishes itself without you having to think about it.
And to understand that surrender to effortless flow, we have to go back to that judo dojo anecdote.
Yes, it's a beautiful story. It perfectly shows why effort fails. Kinslow was a big, strong American kid training in judo in post-WWII Japan. And because of his size and his cultural conditioning, the whole adult promise of power through hard work and self-discipline, he relied entirely on brute force, on his ego.
And he was getting his butt kicked.
Constantly. By a tiny 6-year-old opponent he nicknamed Tsunami Devil. Kinslow would try to grab him, overpower him, use all his strength, but the little boy just flowed around his moves. He refused to meet force with force. He was always in the flow, in the present, where Kinslow was stuck in effort and thinking about winning.
A humiliating defeat every time, but it forced him to rediscover what he called the peaceful power of childhood.
Exactly. Think about a little kid who can be totally engrossed with a stick and a puddle for hours. Boredom is impossible until we learn to set goals, struggle to achieve them, and then get upset when we fail. That experience forced him to realize that this effortless, playful presence, what he'd later call inner thinking, is our natural state. It's the adult demand for control and discipline that builds the wall between us and peace.
Okay, so once you get familiar with observing the gap, once you have that momentum, the practice evolves. It becomes this sustained state he calls inner thinking.
And this is a huge shift. Inner thinking is the sustained awareness that I, the observer, the self, is still present, still the silent witness, even when the thoughts, the feelings, the activity starts up again. It's like stepping outside the mind while the mind is still running.
It sounds like being fully engaged in life, but at the same time being totally detached from the outcome of that engagement. How do you hold both of those realities at once?
The movie analogy is the clearest way to think about it. Life, as it unfolds thought by thought, is just a movie, an illusion of light and shadow on a screen. If you were born in the theater and the movie never stopped, you'd believe the pictures were totally real. You'd react with real fear or real joy.
Right.
Inner thinking is like flipping a switch that briefly stops the film. You realize you're the blank screen, the I am, and you're separate from the drama playing out on you.
So when the film starts up again, you realize you're safe in your seat. You're not the character fighting for survival. You can watch the drama unfold with what he calls amused detachment.
Exactly. You can fully participate, you can laugh, you can cry, but you're fully aware that you're the screen the whole thing is being projected on.
That perspective is foundational because it frees you from identifying with the mind's constant struggle. So inner thinking isn't about stopping thought forever.
No, it's about starting from the level of I am, which is beyond thought, and then allowing thinking and feeling and activity to be added without creating disharmony. It nurtures this unshakable stillness at the center of all the chaos.
And speaking of chaos, one of the mind's most damaging creations is time. The ego-influenced mind creates this illusion of flow from a past we regret to a future we anticipate.
Whereas children, as we said, live entirely in the now.
But adults are just overwhelmed by what he calls future think, just constantly dwelling on the future, which is the ultimate denial of the present moment.
And future think is worry. It's anxiety, stress, dread. It's the mind running endless simulations of what could go wrong. It is the unfailing formula for suffering.
The antidote, then, is simply inner think, pulling the mind back to right now, paying full attention to what's actually happening, without projecting a past regret or a future fear onto it. He makes this so concrete with that powerful story about Thomas, the homeless man.
That story is the critical emotional pivot of the book.
Mm.
Kinslow met Thomas, who was telling him how he lost his home and his job, and he was just speaking so vividly about his life being full of crushing anxiety and guilt and dread. He was convinced he was suffering because of his external situation.
And Kinslow cuts right through it by asking him this very specific question. He stops in mid-sentence and asks, Thomas, where are your problems right now?
And Thomas just paused. He was confused. Then he defaulted back to his story. I lost my home. I have no job. He kept pointing to things outside of the present moment.
So Kinslow clarifies.
Patiently, yeah. He says the circumstances, no home, no job, those are real. That's a real situation. But the problems, the guilt, the crushing anxiety, the dread, the self-pity, those are not real. They are created by your mind attaching useless, damaging emotion to the circumstances.
And in that brief silence, while Thomas was actually considering the difference between his circumstances, what is, and his problems, what his mind was projecting, he had no problems. He spontaneously found this sense of peace and lightness just in that moment of pure presence.
The profound takeaway is that Thomas's real pain came from the homelessness of his mind. The circumstances were real, but the suffering was entirely fabricated by future think and regretful auto-think. When he brought his awareness back to the now, the mind stopped its destructive game and the pain just dissolved.
So we circle right back to that central truth. The problem isn't the problem is the mind's reaction to the problem. The mind takes a circumstance and insists on adding fear to it.
Kinslow uses the boiling pot analogy to clarify this. I am is like the still, cool water in a pot. As it warms up, as consciousness fragments and forms the mind, tiny waves of emotion are formed, which lead to tiny bubbles of thought. Suffering begins when the I am forgets itself and only identifies with the agitation, the bubbles, the movement, the surface of the water.
And we spend all our time trying to control the bubbles.
Yes. And inner thinking allows the self to be aware of itself as both the moving bubbles and the still, cool water at the same time. This gets rid of the existential fear, because the bubble, the me, knows that when it pops, it doesn't disappear. It just becomes formless water again. You realize there is no end, only a change of form.
This realization also has to radically change how we relate to ambition, craving, all of it. It breaks what he calls the cycle of desire, which, when we're not watching it, is totally ego-driven.
The cycle is linear, and it just feeds itself. Senses lead to an impression, which triggers a memory, which creates a desire, which leads to action. If this whole cycle is unobserved, that's auto-thinking.
And here's the paradox of fulfillment, he points out.
Right. If a desire goes unfulfilled, you keep chasing it. It creates impressions for future fulfillment. But if it is fulfilled, say you finally buy that yacht, it creates impressions that spawn even bigger and stronger desires. You never get enough, because the core hunger for wholeness is still unmet.
And we have to be really clear on the distinction he makes between desire and preference.
Absolutely. Desire is ego-driven. It creates yearning, craving, the pain of lack. It's what makes you buy something you didn't need just to get a temporary feeling of being complete. Preference, though, is simple and pure. It's just preferring the blue shirt over the red one.
So how does inner thinking change this?
When you engage in inner thinking, you're already complete in the moment. You're unhooked from the ego's need for things to define you. So your life choices become simple preferences. And because you have this awareness of the whole self, you don't crave the parts. And paradoxically, your desires are fulfilled the moment they arise because the underlying need for wholeness has already been met by your awareness of I am.
Okay, now we're moving into the advanced principles. And Kinslow starts with the big one, the most primal and destructive emotion, fear.
Fear is the foundation for everything else. Anger, jealousy, greed. Even the conditional nature of love and happiness. It's born the instant the mind separates from the single self. The moment duality begins, when you have an I and an other, fear is inevitable, because other is always a potential threat to the fragmented I.
And this is where that abstract idea of time becomes incredibly practical. The philosopher Krishnamurti had that simple, devastating equation. Time plus thought equals fear.
It's perfect. If you dwell on the past, you feel regret or guilt. If you dwell on the future, you feel anxiety or dread. Both are just forms of fear, and both are created by the mind's concept of time. So if you eliminate time by anchoring yourself in the present through inner think, you eliminate fear. And that's the demise of the ego, which is fundamentally terrified that if it merges back into the wholeness of I am, its separate existence will be annihilated.
This also sheds some light on why we seem to keep running back to conflict. If fear is our engine and we know that problems force us into the present moment, then we are, in a really weird way, addicted to our problems.
We are, because we mistakenly credit the external activity, the problem itself, whether it's a chaotic relationship or climbing a sheer rock face, for that feeling of intense aliveness. But in reality, it's the forced attention, the necessity of being absolutely in the present, which is a kind of inner thinking, that spawns those good feelings, those you feelings of peace and joy and vitality.
So a problem is just the lazy person's way to get to inner thinking.
That's a great way to put it.
We create chaos just so we're forced to pay attention, thinking the solution is out there, but the solution was the attention itself the whole time. If we can pay that same attention when things are calm, we get the same feeling of vitality without all the stress.
And this principle applies directly to the physical body, specifically in overcoming pain. Kinslow introduces the concept of the subtle body, which is essential for applying this attention internally.
Okay, explain the subtle body for us.
The subtle body is the energetic or vibrational form that interpenetrates our gross physical body. It's the sensation you can feel that isn't muscle or bone or nerve. It's that tingling, buzzing, electric current lightness, that vibrating energy. It's the body's connection to the limitless source. He calls focusing on this the fantastic voyage.
And what's the benefit of that?
By focusing on this internal, vibrant energy, we can foster deep healing and, he argues, even slow the aging process because we're consciously feeding the physical form from the wellspring of pure awareness.
Which brings us to experience 7, how to overcome physical pain. This is one of the most practical and immediate applications of all this.
It is. The method is simple, but it requires this uncompromising attention. First, you just establish awareness of the general sensation of the subtle body. Then, you shift your attention to a specific area of localized pain. A nagging headache, an aching knee, whatever it is, you have to observe the pain exactly as it is without interfering and without trying to make it go away.
What are you observing exactly?
Its qualities. Is it sharp, throbbing, dull, piercing? Does it have a shape or color in your mind's eye? And you note any mental or emotional component attached to it, the annoyance, the frustration, the fear that it's never going to go away. But the observation has to be maintained without any analysis.
And what happens when you just maintain that pure, non-interfering awareness on the pain?
The pain dissolves, or at the very least, it radically transforms its intensity. Kinslow's insight is that pain is physical, but it only becomes suffering when the mind throws emotion into the mix. Usually from future or past auto-thinking, this pain is going to ruin my day, or I always have this pain. When your attention is just on the sensation itself, without the story, the mental and emotional parts that perpetuate the physical sensation just drop away, and that allows the self's natural harmonizing flow to enter that area of discomfort.
This is where the philosophy takes a sharp turn into advanced science. He shows how our inner experience is really a mirror of the external universe. Kinslow brings in modern physics to support this idea that the observer actually changes reality.
Absolutely. The famous two-slit experiment in quantum mechanics. It showed that light particles behave as waves, or particles, depending on whether or not they're being observed. An event is only a potential until the act of observation collapses it into a concrete reality. This implies that the world we experience isn't just fixed out there.
So if a situation just stays in seed form until we look at it, then our expectations are fundamentally crucial to how reality gets created.
They're everything. Events move in the direction we expect them to move. What we thought was control through force and action is really the illusion of control exerted through our observation and our expectation. If you expect a meeting to go badly, you are subconsciously exerting a force that guides that potential event toward failure. Inner thinking just ensures your observation is free of fear, allowing only the potential of wholeness to manifest.
And this shifts our perception beyond what he calls laser-like consciousness, which is linear, bound by time and space, to holographic or spherical consciousness, which experiences the completeness of reality all at once.
Think about the difference between a photograph and a hologram. A photo is linear. You cut a picture of a dog in half, you get half a dog in each piece. Laser-like consciousness works that way. It fragments everything.
But a hologram is different.
It's spherical. If you cut a hologram of a dog in half, you get two complete, smaller images of the dog. Every single piece contains the complete information about the whole.
That is a staggering implication for how we perceive our fragmented world. It means every piece of creation, the teacup, the cloud, the person next to you, contains complete information about every other piece and ultimately about the self.
And this is where the physicist David Bohm's work comes in. Bohm, who Einstein called his intellectual son, he illustrated this with his famous fish analogy. If you view one fish in an aquarium through two different cameras, you might think there are two separate fish, but you'd notice they move in this perfect, inexplicable synchrony.
Right.
Bohm suggested that subatomic particles, which communicate instantly across vast distances faster than light, aren't actually separate. They're one expression viewed from two different angles.
Yeah.
Holographic consciousness lets us see all the angles at once.
So Kinslow is really suggesting that the fragmented, dualistic reality we all experience is just a result of our limited linear perspective.
Yeah. And the ultimate cognition is realizing it's all an illusion of time and space. He concludes that creation never actually happened. It just is. It is nothing, which is an empty space, but the source of all potential that appears to be something. Not knowing, with a capital K, is the highest form of knowledge. It's where the self realizes that itself, the object it's observing, and the space between them are all essentially nothing. When you realize you're the nothing that is appearing as everything, you're fully realized.
And that realization, that all of creation is ultimately nothing, leads us straight into one of philosophy's oldest and thorniest debates: free will versus determinism. Kinslow says this whole argument only exists under common consciousness, when it's filtered through the ego. But self-awareness just dissolves the dispute.
The dissolution starts when you question authorship. We assume we're the authors of our thoughts and actions. But if you stop and observe, who thought the thought that made you lift your arm, we just reflexively say, I did. But Kinslow argues that thoughts just appear spontaneously out of nothing, and the me rushes in after the fact to take credit for it.
Well, wait, if we have no choice but to react as our conditioning dictates, doesn't that remove all incentive to try inner thinking or self-improvement? Isn't that just fatalism? Just accepting suffering because, oh, I couldn't help it?
That's the key confusion the ego throws up. Inner thinking isn't an action you perform. It's the realization of what's already happening effortlessly. Kinslow points to the insight of Ramesh Balsekar, who compares humans to computers. We're the result of our genetic hardwiring plus all our environmental input, and that produces our actions, our output. The only difference between us and a computer is the ego that insists on taking credit for the input and output.
So if I feel angry, it's because my genetic makeup, conditioned by my specific environment and recent inputs, caused that action. I have no choice but to react as that conditioning dictates, but the self can just watch the whole process unfold with that amused attachment.
Exactly. All action flows from infinite intelligence. The paper airplane you fold relies on this unbelievably complex chain of events, the sun, the tree, the earth, the water, all the synaptic activity in your brain, all of it coming from nothing. When you surrender the idea that you are the author of your actions, the problem of free will just collapses. You're a vehicle through which actions performed. And when you fully accept that there is nothing you can do to bring about self-awareness, the realization of self-awareness dawns spontaneously. Effort is replaced by effortless flow.
And that leads to the great truth Kinslow discovered at his lunch table, that epiphany. Enlightenment is nothing more than completely accepting what is as it is. He talks about sitting with a colleague who is just complaining endlessly about office politics and personal slights.
And Kinslow had this profound realization. His own internal dialogue, his colleagues' complaints, the whole conversation, even the specific stain on the waiter's apron. All of it was in perfect synchrony, and it was not his doing. He writes that he'd completely washed his hands of the whole life thing. He was just a spectator.
That surrender eliminates that desperate need to control everything. When his colleague looked at him, concerned by his sudden silence, Kinslow's only response was, "It is what it is."
Which is not apathy. It's not resignation. It's the alignment of the individual mind with the universal order. That realization brings this unshakable peace, even in the middle of chaos, because the solution for every moment is contained in that moment, and the self is fully accepting of the present.
And this has to change every relationship dynamic.
Completely. Kinslow says relationships exist not for conditional happiness or safety, but solely to make us aware, to force us to find ourselves in other people. Conditional love, the love that requires reasons, I love you because you're kind and smart and successful, that love is subservient to those conditions. And since conditions always change, that love is unstable. That's why you can't stay in conditional love.
So the perfect relationship isn't about fixing your partner or working harder to make them happy. It starts and ends with awareness of the self.
When self-awareness dawns, you just stop trying to fix your partner's behavior. Whether it's a serious issue or something tiny like stopping them from squeezing the toothpaste from the top, you become completely accepting. And this acceptance is the manifestation of universal love, which loves all things without reason, without exception. Kinslow describes it beautifully as God becoming aware of God through the medium of the other person. You cease to judge the drama.
So we have taken the deep dive beyond conditional happiness, navigating the really profound philosophy of Frank Kinslow. We've uncovered that the path to sustained peace lies in this subtle but profound shift in perception, from the fragmented, problem-creating me that relies on effort to the unchanging, peaceful I am that's realized through effortless observation or inner thinking.
And what does this look like in the real world? Kinslow tells us the enlightened soul isn't necessarily the slow-talking, ever-smiling ascetic. When you become self-aware, you might still be grumpy, you might still smoke, you might snore, or love making money. But you are fully accepting of life exactly as it presents itself. You are, as one bumper sticker he saw put it perfectly, diagonally parked in a parallel universe.
You stop being the struggling actor.
You become the perfectly guided vehicle through which action is just effortlessly performed.
The ultimate lesson here is surrender. The enlightened soul is often likened to that ancient, perfectly honed samurai sword that lets a falling leaf flow effortlessly around the blade, completely untouched by the conflict. This suggests that ruling over the all is simply accepting what is. So if this is true, that perfection is just a single thought away, the thought of surrender, and that suffering only arises when the mind attaches unnecessary emotion to a circumstance, then we have to ask ourselves, we have to ask you, how often are you confusing the exhausting act of doing with the simple, effortless act of being? And what daily struggle could you surrender right now, knowing that true wholeness is already effortlessly present?
It's the simple truth hidden in plain sight. In that children's allegory, row, row, row your boat, it tells us to gently row our boat down the stream, merrily, 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 merrily. Because life is but a dream. It's an effortless flow. Acceptance is the current, and the destination is guaranteed. The struggle is the illusion. The stillness is the truth.
Until next time, keep diving deep.